Noon Hour News, information, and engagement. It's the Heartland at Noon on 800 CHAB.
So this is kind of how I feel right now. I'm a little starstruck. I'm a little bit nervous. Like the late Chris Farley, when he did the Chris Farley show on Saturday Night Live, and his guest was Paul McCartney. Remember this?
Welcome to the Chris Farley Show. I'm Chris Farley. My guest tonight is one of the greatest musicians, rock musicians, I guess songwriter ever. Remember when you were with the Beatles? Yeah, sure. That was awesome. Yeah, it was.
I'm afraid this interview might go that way at some point, because I've got rock and roll royalty on the Heartland at Noon in the CHAB studio today. His bio on his website says it better than I can. He's that rare artist who has transcended time, genres, and generations with a body of work that continues to resonate with fans, both old and new. His voice has been rated among the finest in rock and roll music, and his extensive catalog of songs is the envy of his contemporaries. He's a member of the Canadian Music Hall of Fame, the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame, Canadian Music Industry Hall of Fame, Canadian Walk of Fame, Canadian Music Industry Hall of Fame, the Prairie Music Hall of Fame. He's a multiple Juno Award winner, recipient of the Order of Canada, Governor General's Performance Arts Award, and several broadcast music industry awards for over 1 million airplays of his songs. He's one of the most celebrated rock artists in Canadian music history. He is Burton Cummings. Thrilled to have you here, sir.
Goodness gracious, that introduction went on for a while. It almost sounded like you were talking about someone else for a while. That's did I do all that stuff?
That's a hell of a resume.
That's, we were talking earlier when I first came to this station. I've never taken any of it for granted. I know how lucky I've been. The songs have never gone away. The first big one, These Eyes, was 50 years ago now. It was released in Canada in 1968 and took off in the States in 1969. And the songs, thankfully, have never gone away. I still hear These Eyes and No Time and American Woman and Break It to Them Gently and Stand Tall and Share the Land, and I still hear these songs all the time. So I do want you to know, and I want your listeners to know, I have never taken it for granted, not for one day. You'll never meet a more grateful musician for his success, never.
I just checked our record library. Of course, our format on CHAB is the greatest hits of all time. We've got 14 Burton Cummings songs in the rotation right now, 19 Guess Who songs in the rotation.
My goodness, that's 33 songs. Well, I guess you're putting some gas in my car.
We are.
Wow,
I'm pleased to do it. Pleased to do it.
That's great. We were talking earlier, I grew up in Winnipeg when there were 3 major AM stations in the 1950s, all competing for the audience. So we were privy to way more music than any other place in Canada. Winnipeg in the 1950s and early to mid-60s was definitely the rock and roll capital of Canada. Montreal was all basically francophone. Toronto was R&B bands with silk suits and light shows. And there was nobody in Vancouver yet. So really and truly, Winnipeg, at one point when I was in high school, in St. John's High in Winnipeg, there were 200 bands in Winnipeg. And the population at that point couldn't have been more than about 400,000. 200 working bands, and we all worked every Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So it was absolutely a tremendous vibe in the air, the music, and of course with 3 major stations competing for the audience. They were all bringing their best game every day. CKY was one of them. It was 50,000 watts, clear channel. So it was being heard in Saskatchewan. It was being heard in North Dakota. It was being heard on a cold winter night. They could even hear it in Minneapolis, 450 miles away. So I feel very fortunate to have been in Winnipeg, to have spent my early teens there. At that point in history, it was definitely the center of rock and roll in Canada.
and some of you made it big. I mean, not a lot, but some of you.
Well, here's the thing. Randy, back before I ever joined the Guess Who, they were pretty successful. They had a record called Shakin' All Over with Chad Allen singing lead. And then across town was Neil Young and the Squires. He went to Kelvin High School. He was playing all the community centers and the churches. I was in a band called the Devrons. Donnie McDougall was in a band called The Chosen Few, I think it was. I'm not sure, but Donnie McDougall ended up in the Guess Who years later. All of us were working all the time. And here's another thing, interestingly enough. The drinking age was still 21. So the kids weren't going to bars yet. You know, nowadays, if a kid is 16 and he's got a bit of a 5 o'clock shadow, he can go to the bars. But the drinking age was still 21 before it was lowered to 18. Every weekend, countless community centers, countless churches, countless high school auditoriums. When I say 200 bands, I'm not really exaggerating. You know, that's a tremendous number of working bands to be in one city in the 60s in Canada. It was tremendous.
You know, you mentioned Chad Allen and the Expressions, and,
Yes.
and local guys. Some of the fellas I play golf with, as a matter of fact, who are in their 60s, around 70 years old. They talk about Chad Allen and the Expressions being at the old Temple Gardens in downtown Moose Jaw.
Well, I played Temple Gardens as well. It was 50 cents to get in and see us. We were doing 4 hours a night. 60 minutes on, 10 minutes off, 60 minutes on. I was doing most of the singing. At first, when I joined, I wasn't singing that much lead, but then Chad Allen left to go back to university. I took over. We spent the summer of 66. I had just turned 18. We spent the entire summer in Regina at a place called the Westward Inn. 7 guys in 2 rooms. Oh, the glamour of it all. And every night we would drive out from Regina to some other place, whether it was Katepwa or Moose Jaw, Saskatoon, wherever. We would play for 4 hours. We had 2 roadies with us and 5 guys in the band, 7 guys in 2 hotel rooms. And that was me cutting my teeth on being in a traveling band. It toughened me up. It probably had a lot to do with the shaping of my vocal abilities, because we've all read about what the Beatles did in Hamburg. You know, they were playing 6, 7, sometimes 8 hours a night. And that's what gave John and Paul those sandpaper voices that they could scream all night. I think my time in Regina that summer helped me with stamina. It helped me develop my singing chops, because we were still a cover band. We were still doing the Kinks, the Zombies, the Stones, Paul Revere and the Raiders, the Dave Clark Five, Manfred Mann. So I was imitating Mick Jagger and Paul Jones and Mark Lindsay. I was imitating all those singers, and it gave me chops that I might not otherwise have had. You know, it was it was brutally hard and difficult, but it was also great training, I think.
It sounds like it might have been the inspiration for running back to Saskatoon.
No, absolutely. The first line of the hook in that song is Moose Jaw, saw a few, moose 'em in 2, running back to Saskatoon. Red Deer, Terrace, and Medicine Hat, sing another prairie tune. I wrote those lyrics sitting in Orly Airport in Paris. I had gone to Europe just to roam around. I was 21 or 22 years old, and I caught a flight out. We had just finished an album, I think the Rockin' album for the Guess Who. So about 1972, I did want to see Jim Morrison's grave. I did want to visit an aunt that was living in Rome. So I was on my way home to Winnipeg, and I heard on the speakers in the New York airport, flight 493 for Paris, leaving in 15 minutes. And I just went I had a brand new American Express card, bought a ticket to Paris, and went to Paris and went to Jim Morrison's grave. And when I was leaving Paris to go to Rome, I had 2 or 3 hours to sit and wait in the Orly airport. I wrote Orly there, and I wrote the lyrics for Running Back to Saskatoon in the Paris airport. I was thinking about home. I was a little bit homesick, and I remembered how much time we had spent in Saskatchewan and Alberta. Moose Jaw saw a few, moose 'em in 2, running back to Saskatoon. Those lyrics came to me across the pond in Europe.
Wow. We're not keeping you from anything, are we?
No.
Can I hang around a little bit?
I love talking about myself.
Great. We'll take a commercial break, and we'll be back with more Burton Cummings on the Heartland at Noon on 800 CHAB.